The watch that I've got here in my hands is getting so much attention lately and on so many platforms. And my question is, why? Because if no one ever told me where this watch came from, I could easily think that this is a beautifully executed, a very well made Swiss watch. But it's not. It's coming out of China. And there's so much stigma coming out of China, and I'm thinking, you know what? Those are the years of past, because this particular watch, or even this particular brand, I believe is going to break that stigma. Because this is stunning. Now, it's not perfect. There is no perfect watch, but this is darn good, I tell you what. And I want to share my thoughts on it. Let's check it out. Now, for years we've been experiencing CNC machine parts, cases, bracelets, all coming out of China. And many brands around the world have silently been using these parts in their own watches. And I say silently for a reason. I'm not talking about micro brands. I'm talking about major brands here, guys. They've been silently sourcing parts from Asia, namely China, to use in their own watches. The Swiss, the German, Japanese, the list goes on. Now, this watch here is a pure demonstration of the watchmaking capabilities coming out of China. And I've got to tell you, it's surprisingly good. And it's a very interesting watch because it's fully made in China. In fact, the hand-turned Guilloché dials are made by Cheng Yukai. It's basically China's sole Guilloché master craftsman. You see, this is a French watch. Well, the owners are French. It's a journey of two Frenchmen who are proudly manufacturing their watches in China. And I say proudly because the craftsmanship they've sourced is as good as any of the brands we've come to know over the years, but without the exorbitant price tag. Now, this isn't a cheap watch by any means. It comes in at around 5,000 Australian dollars. But all things considered, that's actually really inexpensive for what I've got here in my hands. The packaging is the first thing that caught my attention. The feel is actually difficult to describe, but it's got a sense of a fine rubbery texture that exudes something of refinement and finesse. Because that's the way it feels to me. The box itself is lacquered and opens up to something that you could use as a desk display or even an organizer for your watch and extra bits. In other words, it's a very practical design. So in that department, even before getting to the watch, hats off regarding their case design. Now, getting back to the watch itself, looking closely at the case shape of this watch, it's actually inspired by Chinese architecture and art, as well as Oriental geometries and motifs. You can also see similarities to brands that we know. Brands like AP, Patek, and Vacheron, just to name a few. And if those watches mimic each other in certain design elements, well, this joins that bandwagon whilst offering an Oriental feel and culture. And looking closely at the specs of the watch, with a case diameter of 40mm and a case height of 10.4, this watch wears really well on any wrist. Now, the crown is a 5.8mm signed screw-down crown. The watch offers 100 meters of water resistance, and the total weight on the supplied bracelet sized to my 18cm wrist, I measure in at exactly 129 grams. Now, the overhead shows just how well this watch fits on my wrist, because being a 40mm case, it wears with plenty of wrist presence, but also with the addition of comfort and balance, because that case height of 10.4 is a real joy here. It easily slides under any sleeve, and that bracelet tapers down to 17.9, which again offers real comfort underneath the wrist. Now, that bracelet does feel extremely comfortable, but there's no denying that the bracelet's inspiration is from the Vacheron 222. And that's an iconic piece for sure. It's extremely refined, there's a slider on the swivel which allows for extension to get the watch on easier, and the tolerances and the feel are very well machined and finished. Now, here's the real beauty, the clasp. And this is a quick adjustment on the fly clasp, and it's featured in watches like IWC, Glasutte Original. It's basically the logo in a push button form. It allows that bracelet to be micro-adjusted in increments for expanding and contracting wrist throughout the day. And there's no need to remove the watch from your wrist because it's all done with the push of a button whilst you're wearing the watch. And one thing I must say that even the wearability of the bracelet caters for smaller wrists because the minimum inner diameter of the bracelet is 47.2. I've found really great dimensions and proportions here. There's also an integrated rubber strap with a deploying clasp. It's comfortable, the wearability and the feel of that rubber is on a very high level. It's so soft, I found it conforms to any wrist with ease. But put all that aside, the real hero of this watch is that dial. It's a hand-turned Guilloché dial on a lathe. It's made by a gentleman named Cheng Yukai, and as I mentioned, it's China's sole Guilloché master craftsman. Now, the difficulty of producing such a handmade dial of this magnitude offers very little margin for error. That's why many of these dials are discarded if a mistake is made during this process. The texture and finishing of that dial captures the light beautifully, and if you notice, there's also a step-down section as a chapter ring. And you can see there's a motif pattern running the entire length of the circumference of that dial, and it's loomed, as is the handset. Now, speaking of that loom, all I can say, very cool. You see, it's not a dive watch loom. It is, after all, a dressier sports style watch, and in that genre I've seen better looms, but I've also seen worse. So it's doing pretty good. And if you look at that motif, each individual minute is represented by those sections. Now, turning my attention to the case of the watch, what I've noticed is absolutely superb transitions between the satinized brush surfaces and the highly polished bezels. That concave shaped bezel also adds to the watch's aesthetics. It's like an optical illusion of being even thinner than the watch really is. Now, all that said, this brings me on to the room for improvement of this watch. And for me, it's the movement. Now, I'm not saying that the movement is a bad movement. Looking at the specs, it's a Peacock SL155. It's an automatic caliber, around 41 hours power reserve. It's adjusted in 5 positions. And if you look at the case back, you can see a stone lion with its open mouth. When that blackened tungsten rotor appears, it looks like that lion is smiling, which is pretty nice. But when you spin it around and the rotor disappears, you get a good view of the balance and escapement. So again, nicely thought out. And even the finishing on that case back, on that lion's head, the detail is another delight to the eyes. So I'm really liking what I'm seeing here and how I've experienced this on the wrist. However, the room for improvement that I found in that movement is its inability to stop seconds. In other words, there's no hacking here. So if I unscrew that crown, as you can see, it pops, I pull it out to the first position, and the second keeps moving. Now I can adjust the time, as you can see, but that seconds keep sweeping. So I've read a little bit of literature regarding this caliber, and it seems Atelier Wen actually wanted to address this issue. However, the only alternative they found whilst using this caliber would have been to sacrifice the watch's final height. So in the end, they haven't included hacking seconds here in order to maintain that thin profile and overall wearing experience. Now for me, I would have loved to see this somehow implemented in a future edition. Now, is it a deal breaker? Well, if this is the only real gripe I can come up with after a week of wearing this watch, I suppose it's probably something one can learn to live with. But I must say, guys, I'm super impressed with this level of finishing, the attention to detail on this watch. The fact that the dial is handmade by a master craftsman adds that genuine depth and an artisan feel to the whole process. I know that the brand's inception is young, and I think if they continue to go in the direction they've chosen with what they can produce, they've got a very bright future ahead of them. So hit me up in the comments, guys. Let me know what you think of this watch, which to me, it's more like a piece of art. It wears extremely thin on the wrist. It really does look and feel the business. And if you're serious about quality watches with more than just assembled parts from a parts bin or off the shelf, well, you really can't ignore a piece like this, especially at the price at which it's being offered and what's actually involved to get this finalized product. Thanks for watching, guys. Be well, be healthy, and in your pursuit of your next acquisition, enjoy that journey, and we'll see you in the next one.